Hello. I'm assuming we're live now, and I'm hoping that everybody saw the movie and had a wonderful time. And I'm really excited to be joined here tonight. I'm Anya Schoolman. I'm the executive director of Solar United Neighbors, and we have three amazing guests. I'm going to introduce the guests, and then we're just going to have a conversation and invite people to ask questions. You just put in the chat your questions. We'll answer them live. We'll have a discussion. The first guest that you're going to hear from tonight is Dave Pomerantz, and you'll all recognize him from the movie. He's the executive director of the Energy and Policy Institute. Dave was the Energy Policy Institute is a watchdog organization which works to expose attacks on renewable energy and counter misinformation by fossil fuel and utility interests. I'm actually not going to do the whole bio. I think people want to hear from you. Alex used to be at Sunrun, and that's how I got to know him. And like Dave, is a great partner, a great leader in the area. He's currently clean energy and climate policy consultant and co-chair of Clean Energy for Biden. And as I mentioned, he was the vice president for public policy at Sunrun. And he has deep expertise in some of the main topic of the movie, which was the big solar fight in Nevada. And he used to serve, he actually told me that he got into solar and because of that fight there. And so I think he's going to tell us some, hopefully share with us some frontline stories. And then the third panelist we have tonight is Denise Fairchild, and she's president, CEO of an inaugural founder of the Emerald Cities Collaborative. And their mission is to green our cities, build resilient local economies, and ensure equity and inclusion in both the process and the outcomes of the green and healthy economy. Denise has been a mentor and a leader and a sort of guiding light for so many of us that are working to make clean energy and not only sustainable, but takes into account the economy of the people and the real people and the process and the participation of the people who are impacted by it. And she has always been an amazing mentor to me because she knows how to put ideas into action. And it's not just about going to conferences and talking about it, but it's real on the ground projects and transformation. And her list was so long, I can't read it all, but some of the amazing things she did, she founded the...
Don't even do that, Anya. Don't even go there.
You don't want me to go there? All right.
Not that conversation.
She's done so many cool things. So first Dave, then Alex, then Denise. Talk to us a little bit about yourself and about the movie, and then we're going to just dive into the questions.
Sure. Thanks so much, Anya. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. And a real big thanks to Solar United Neighbors for hosting this and for all of your incredible work to organize and mobilize people around the country in support of good solar policy. So I'll just give a little bit about myself. What has brought me to my current work is concerns about climate change. So I used to work for a little bit as a newspaper reporter briefly. And I kind of got bit when I was in college and even while I was doing journalism work by the climate change bug. And that's really kind of what I wanted to dedicate my life to. So I spent about 7 or 8 years working for Greenpeace, kind of campaigning to push companies and toward making renewable energy commitments and climate commitments. And as I was doing that, you know, what really emerged to me as kind of this big problem kind of at the core of how we need to decarbonize and all the political problems we have around passing good climate policy was these electric utilities. And I didn't really know much about them. A lot of people who I worked with and knew didn't know that much about them. Maybe we knew that they were kind of problematic, but they certainly didn't have the reputation that like Exxon did around, oil spills, or Chevron for their great environmental injustices. And so I was really curious to kind of learn more about that. And as kind of part of that journey for me about 5 years ago, took over the helm of the Energy and Policy Institute. And we're definitely not a household name, but if you want to learn more about our work, you should check out our website, energyandpolicy.org, which is all one word. And the thing that we try to do is basically uncover and expose how utilities are trying to block or delay or slow down the transition to clean energy. And in the past couple of years, I think we've really tried to expand that mission, not just thinking about how our utilities blocking or delaying the transition to clean energy, but really more broadly, are they blocking a transition to clean energy in the way that's sort of most equitable, that can be accessible to the most people, right? Because there are ways for utilities to, switch from coal and gas to wind and solar, and we absolutely want them to do that. That is a huge part of the solution. But there are ways that they could do that provide a lot more benefits to more people, and there are ways they could do that where they get to sort of make sure all the benefits flow to their investors on Wall Street. And so we are sort of trying to expose all that. A couple of things I'll just say quickly. I hope everybody enjoyed the movie. I was really excited to see the movie, not just because of some of our work is featured in it, but I think this area around sort of utilities and their obstructionism, it often is pretty wonky. It kind of gets into the policy weeds. And I was just excited to see a film that kind of explained a lot of this in ways that regular people can understand, that like I can show to my friends and family and say, this is kind of the work that I do and the work that my colleagues do. And we're trying to change this and stop it and have it be something that they would get. So I hope people, take that away from it and are able to use this. I think my hunch is the folks who are here with us tonight have a much higher kind of IQ around energy issues than many of your friends and family. And hopefully this film can be like a good organizing and educating tool for you. The other thing I'll say before I just pass the mic off is there's so many stories in this vein, and a lot of them, this film wasn't able to get into, but there are a lot of things that have me really hopeful from the last couple of years in other states, and we can get into them in the panel, but in places like Virginia and Arizona and other states around the country where people are organizing to confront the political power of these utilities. There have been incredible successes of people getting legislators and policymakers to pledge not to take money from electric utilities and other fossil fuel companies, and we've seen that translate into real wins for clean energy. People right now during the pandemic are pushing back all around the country over utilities, incredibly unjust, regressive disconnection policies to cut the power off for people who are behind on their bills, even while they're raking in, obscene fortunes for Wall Street and paying their executives tens of millions of dollars in compensation every year. And they're doing that and they're winning. So I think there's a lot of really good, exciting momentum that we have right now. And I'd love to talk about all that and hopefully answer your questions, and very honored to be here with Denise and Anya and Alex. So look forward to a good conversation.
All right, am I up next?
You're up next.
Great. Thanks, Anya, and Dave. I want to second that. Nobody should have their power cut off during this terrible crisis, and no utility should be allowed to do it. And a lot of places have prohibited it, but not enough. It's a huge problem. So I'm glad you raised that. And I also want to shout out to Anya and Solar United Neighbors. Thanks for putting this on and doing this screening. But also thanks for your amazing organizing work. I really love what you do, organizing people and solar users and to advocate for not just their solar rights, but for their communities and for climate changing and much beyond. So they do great work. So I'm originally from Nevada. I was born and raised in Las Vegas and went to work for Sunrun, as Anya said, because of the fight over rooftop solar in Nevada in 2015 and 16. At the time, I was Senator Reid's senior advisor for energy and environmental policy. He was the US Senate Democratic leader, which meant most of my time was focused on national policies and climate change. But Senator Reid had built much of his legacy on what he did in Nevada to protect natural resources, to spur the clean energy economy, so no more new coal proposals would happen in Nevada, and the state could get completely off of coal. And he really stood up for vulnerable communities that were disproportionately affected by pollution. For example, the Moapa Band of Paiutes just north of Las Vegas had until a few years ago, had a coal-fired power plant and a coal ash problem right on the border of their reservation. And so we had seen the solar wars take place in Arizona in 2014 and just didn't want to see a repeat. We didn't want, it's not that we were afraid of the controversy, but Nevada was going in the right direction on clean energy, and we didn't need anything that would set that back. But best laid plans, the solar fight started slowly in the legislature, and they couldn't reach a deal on lifting this arbitrary cap on how many solar systems could be installed. And so they punted the controversy over to the state energy regulator, the Public Utilities Commission. And the debate got hotter and hotter. There were people protesting, as you saw in Jonathan Scott's documentary. And so I and a couple of my colleagues, with Senator Reid's blessing, got more directly involved. We met with NV Energy. We met with state utility commissioners. I personally sat down with the PUC chair in his office in Carson City and told him that I thought that the utility was heading in a dangerous direction. I even asked executives at NV Energy's parent company, Berkshire Hathaway, to make a deal and not bring the Arizona solar wars to Nevada. But you don't always get what you want. And we watched as Nevada inexplicably walked further and further towards this cliff on killing the rooftop solar industry. And it was really just like everybody had blinders on to all the warnings in full view. And right when we thought that they'd turn and avoid this cliff, as Arizona and other states had, Nevada just kept walking and jumped off on December 22nd, 2015. So 2,500 jobs were lost overnight. Tens of thousands of solar customers were told that their solar would no longer be credited for its full value. So literally everyone lost. Even the utility. The utility didn't win. Their reputation took a terrible beating in the months following that bad decision. And as you saw, people packed the hearing rooms of the PUC afterwards. They protested out in front of it. They protested at the legislature. They were outraged. And as I said in the documentary, legislators in 2016 were hearing from constituents when they were knocking on doors. Voters raised it as one of the top issues that they cared about. We'd never seen anything like that before, not in 2016. President Obama came to Las Vegas for an energy summit in August 2016 and went after the forces against solar in his speech, much more articulately than I can. And even Mark Ruffalo jumped into the fight. Mark Ruffalo jumped into the solar fight. So this all culminated into a ballot measure to allow customers to leave the utility and choose their own power provider, called the Energy Choice Initiative, which passed in the 2016 election, passed overwhelmingly. And as a result, by 2017, the situation in Nevada was a complete mess. You had the utility fighting deregulation because the ballot measure needed to pass one more time before it became law. You had tens of thousands of people with solar systems on the roofs, and they had no idea whether they would ever pay for themselves. And worst of all, you had thousands of solar workers who were installers like Osh Thomas in the documentary from Sunrun, who was known as the forewoman, lose their jobs. And so it was, there was no winner in this, and the pressure, it created a lot of pressure on the politicians to act. So because of that experience, I had learned just a lot about this rooftop solar industry because of my direct involvement and exposure to it, and was struck by its sensitivity to state level policy. But I also learned about just the tremendous potential for innovation and what could be done, what was going to happen with battery technology if rooftop solar was allowed to thrive. So when Senator Reid retired at the end of 2016, I was invited by Sunrun to join their team. And I told them that the first thing I wanted to do was work on the effort to bring solar access back to Nevada. And as you can see, it was a rough experience for them. They were quite skeptical that we'd be able to do it, but they gave me enough rope to work with. So I worked with a small coalition of advocates and legislators on the effort. In the legislature, unanimously passed the Solar Bill of Rights that Jonathan talked about in the film. And that bill was led by State Senator Chris Brooks, a former union electrician and solar executive who I've been friends with since Senator Reid's office, since I worked for Senator Reid. And it was his brainchild, and it's today the strongest solar bill of rights of any state. So that's my nexus to this whole story that was presented in the film, and why I jumped into the effort. It was an opportunity to protect this small but rapidly growing industry that gives consumers direct access to clean air solutions for their communities. So at that, I'll pass the mic, and I look forward to questions.
Thanks, Alex. Denise, I can't wait to hear your part of this story.
Great stories. And let me just say that I am a true admirer of Anya. I consider her to be one of the true heroes and leaders of the energy democracy movement, and literally putting power in the hands of everyday residents. And so I want to thank her for inviting me into this conversation and the work that she's doing, not only just in DC, but throughout the country. So my name is Denise Fairchild. I'm the president and CEO of a nonprofit known as Emerald Cities Collaborative. We're going down that yellow brick road to the Emerald City. It was founded 10 years ago. We're now celebrating a decade of work. At the same time, the last time we were in an economic crisis, right? And so it was 2009. When a coalition came together, a coalition of community organizations joined by labor, joined by environmental and sustainable development organizations. So the whole idea was, the country was sinking, and it was how do we rebuild America in a way that would be sustainable, just, and democratic. So we have a three-part mission, which is how do we green our cities within public and private investments, make sure that we're creating good union jobs that can rebuild the middle class, and that will ultimately bring low income and communities of color into the center of this new green economy, and not to be playing on the periphery, but to be, again, producers in clean energy as well as consumers. So we do this work around the country. We do it in coalitions, and we're grounded. We've got staff in 6 cities that are doing this work, and specifically in building local energy economies, but also local sustainable food economies, and addressing our water infrastructure as well. And so I, in terms of my own pathway into this work, I don't even know. I consider myself an reluctant environmentalist. I do this really from the standpoint of a social justice and an economic justice standpoint. That's the work that I've been in, and I've just attached it to the growth of this environmental sector, and recognizing that it's, we have 2 choices, 2 pathways that we can take as this, the solar industry grows, as the clean energy industry grows, that we can either reproduce the income inequalities, the health inequities, the wealth gap. We can reproduce it with a new technology, solar, or we can use this opportunity to actually dismantle all the structures that have kept us from being healthy, that has kept us from actually reinvesting in our communities, that will help us exactly give people an opportunity to have, take power in their own hands. And so I think this work is probably sort of the most important, if not the last economic transition in this country, if not the globe, right? The way I see the world, every 50 years, at least the last 150 years, we've seen a major economic transition, right? From the agricultural economy to the industrial economy, to the suburban economy, to the digital economy. So we're now here at the green economy. And because it's an existential crisis in terms of climate change and all that we're doing, that we're recognizing that what we're doing to destroy our ecosystem, it may be the last economic transition. So this is the time to get it right. So what does it mean to get it right? It means that we really need to change our economy from being extractive, right? That's what it's doing. It's extracting from our environment, whether it's fossil fuels, denuding our forests, blowing off our mountaintops, but it's also extracting our human assets, our community assets, and the monopoly of the industry is something that really needs to be democratized. And I think that's what the whole film is all about, and what it's going to take to democratize an industry that's revolutionizing itself. It is radically changing, and the question is it going to change for the good, or is it going to change for keeping wealth in the hands of that 1%? This is a very important moment in which we can change the pathway in which the energy sector is going. But it's going to be a struggle, and I think that's what the film demonstrated. And this is not hard because of such embedded interest that we have in the fossil fuel industry. And one of the things that I write about and I talk about is that I think our struggle to dismantle the fossil fuel industry is equal to and similar to the struggle that we've had to dismantle the slave economy. It was just as entrenched. It was global. The self-interest of the elites was so embedded. It was a part of the entire lifestyle that slave economy was. You couldn't even imagine not to have a world without slavery. I mean, it's just how do we grow? How does the cotton industry or the farm, how does that live without slavery, enslaved people? It's the same way that we have to look at the fossil fuel industry. It's that kind of movement, that kind of struggle that we're facing, because we can't even imagine what it's going to be like to live without fossil fuels. The technology is there, but nonetheless, we're still wedded to our cars and our air conditioners and so many other things. So it's an important time in which we're in right now, and I think the movement of the energy democracy movement and others that are on this panel that were in the film are going to be critical to making a difference. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's great. That's so helpful. Thank you. I have a question from the audience, and I'm going to throw it out to Dave first, and it's about how can utilities do this? Like, how are they able to lobby legislators? Is this regulated? Is this legal? Is it legal everywhere? And it just seems wrong. The commenter said, at least it seems even more wrong than money in politics already is. And so I want to throw that to you first, Dave, because that's kind of your specialty. But I want Alex and Denise to be thinking about, how do we fight power? Like, we each, the four of us, all have these different pieces of fighting power and fighting for change. And so if Dave could start about this utility issue, and then maybe we could hear from Alex and then Denise about how do you make that change? How do you fight this fossil fuel industry and these utilities that are really trying to stop this change?
Yeah, thanks, Anya, and thanks for the very good question. So just to start by kind of validating the premise of the question, it is unbelievably wrong and messed up. And I do actually think when we're talking about these monopoly utilities, so I am a big believer that our kind of general campaign finance system in this country is broken and you know, written by and geared for corporate interests, and that a lot of things will be better when we change that. But I think, like the question kind of implied, it's even worse with monopolies. And the reason I think that is, if you don't like the political activity of you know, the company that you buy your sneakers from or something like that, you can buy your shoes from another company, right? As you can take your business elsewhere as a sort of a protest to their political speech. Um, Most of us don't have that choice with our utility, right? If, like, I'm here in PG&E territory in California, if I don't like the way PG&E is taking my money on my bill every month that I send them and using it to spend toward sort of garnering and deploying political influence, lobbying, et cetera, I have no choice. You know, we all need electricity. Nobody's disputing that. It is a life-sustaining technology in modern America and everywhere. So, you know, to me, it's actually, and there are legal arguments around this, it's kind of an infringement of our First Amendment rights when we are being compelled to sort of, you know, have speech made with some of the, you know, a few pennies or dimes of our bill every month is going toward the political speech of these companies, if it is in fact speech. So it's deeply problematic. A couple other things I'll say about this is, you know, how is that regulated? Is it legal? Actually, there are a lot of existing laws and policies on the books in many of these states that should stop at least some of this behavior, and they're not being enforced, right? And the place where they would be enforced is by public utilities commissions. So, you know, you all just saw the film, so I don't need to kind of go into what a public utility commission or a public service commission is. But most public utility commissions have rules on the books that utilities should not, at minimum, they should not be able to take your dollars from you as a ratepayer and spend it on politics. A lot of times that's not enforced. And so, you know, organizations like Solar United Neighbors and other, you know, advocacy groups can go, you know, into rate cases at the public utilities commissions and fight against that. And I think we need to do a lot more of that. A lot of that is happening. And then we could use more laws on it. And there is hope for that too. You know, there have been some efforts in that vein. New Hampshire passed a law in recent years banning utilities from taking ratepayer money and spending it on trade associations. So there's a lot more laws that we can pass and laws that we have on the books that we can enforce in this vein. The last thing I'll say is, one of the things that has been most inspiring to me in the last few years is watching how activists have gotten really creative and effective at combating utility money in politics. So, as an example, and I think there are some activists on the call who have helped do this in Arizona, at least. In Virginia and Arizona, you've had activists approach their legislators and ask them to, you know, essentially swear off of monopoly utility money and say, we want to know that you're making decisions that aren't clouded by, you know, cashing that $2,500 check from Dominion Energy or Arizona Public Service or whoever it might be every month. So every year. So we want you to swear off of utility money in politics. And I think that's been really effective. To be honest, as kind of a student of how these utility influence machines work, you know, the money is like not the only or even the most important part of that. There are all kinds of regulatory capture and how they use lobbying and how they, you know, use a revolving door where they hire regulators after they get out of office. There's a whole massive kind of octopus of how utilities exert political influence, and the campaign contributions is just one piece of it. But when we can have our elected officials say, we're gonna refuse those campaign contributions, we want it clear that we represent the people who elect us, not the utilities, and we don't want any money to cloud that. That is a very powerful symbol. And I think that has led to positive change in a couple of places. And I would love to see that happen more. It's a difficult thing to do single-handedly by yourself, like all change making is. That's why we organize. But you know, there are different groups and chapters of groups all around the country who can be taking up that mantle at Solar United Neighbors, certainly one of them if you're working with them. So that is something that has given me a lot of inspiration in the last couple of years on the money and politics front.
Yeah, and I would say besides money in politics, it's actually money going directly to the industry, and I think that we're propping up the industry with subsidies as a prime example, and it's only through organizing. You can't fight the advocacy that and the lobbyists that the industry has other than with people power, with organizing on the ground in the way that I've seen Anya and her coalition, beat back district, city level policies to make solar accessible. And I think Black, Indigenous, and people of color have been leading in many ways the grassroots movement and the fight to get clean, to really leave their energy ghettos and to get clean energy and to ultimately to address the respiratory and health, the disproportionate health and respiratory challenges that our communities have historically faced. We're finally getting attention to this issue and recognizing the role of the air we breathe by the carbon that we emit. And so it's through that we're even seeing movements against divestments of foundations that fund us, of corporations, of universities to pull their pension dollars out of the industry. That I think is going to be part of the pressure campaign that's going to move the industry to do something different and to be more democratic. However, I could also say that from what I'm seeing, that the fossil fuel industry is getting into solar and they're getting into wind, and they are actually, with all of the cities and corporations that are making these huge commitments to be net zero by pick a date, the fossil fuel industry is coming in and say, okay, we'll do that. We'll switch out our fuels and we'll give you. And so what you still have, you have clean energy, but you still have monopoly. And that's the challenge that we have to deal with, is to not just address the issue of clean energy, but the whole issue of monopoly and how do we truly democratize the fossil fuel industry or the clean energy sector for that matter.
Yeah, if I could pile on, I think that there's this weird tension that, it's confounded me for the last 4 years working for a residential solar company, and even before that working for the Senate Democratic leader. You have a monopoly that acts in the public interest, is regulated in the public interest, so effectively an extension of government. And then on the other side, they have their shareholders and they have to maximize their profits because they're a private corporation. And so where is that balance? You can't, we want our regulators to always be perfect, but in some cases they're elected politicians and they take campaign contributions. Some places they're appointed by the governor and the governor can push them. So you have this weird conflicting forces, and you expect them to do the right thing. And ultimately, what we see is they're built to have market share. They're built to get market share, and when there's an encroachment on it, then they fight. And that's where you see these really difficult fights come up, where you had utilities fighting churches trying to put solar on their roof, which just seems bonkers to normal people. But it happens because the bigger picture is there's pressure to have market share and control and not lose that control.
We could just keep talking all night. We have a question from the audience that I'm going to expand the question a little bit. The question is, what do you think the Biden administration will do to increase solar and other renewables? And how can advocates and power companies work together? Which I think are two different questions. But I would say, what do we think might happen, or what do we think should happen? I think it's okay to just say, well, because I'm not sure anybody knows what might happen yet. And I'm just going to give an example on our end. Solar United Neighbors is pushing the idea or a campaign that part of the stimulus should be a 30 million roof bill. And the idea is some combination of extending the investment tax credit, make it a grant for nonprofits and low-income households, and really focus investment in low-income neighborhoods and also rural farms and other struggling frontline communities. And just put solar everywhere. You got the money savings, it's shovel ready, it's fast, it's jobs, you get local economic development, and you are pushing out that piece of the energy democracy, or that piece of the sector. So that's what we're pushing for, but I'd love to hear from each of you what you think would be the most important sort of maybe first year of the Biden administration or the new administration or the new Congress in terms of moving the ball forward on both distributed solar and energy democracy and equity. Anybody can take this one.
Well, I'll start and say, well, I know what he is not going to do, which is the sort of the progressive, take the progressive stance, which is take the subsidies out of the industry, right? So he's not going to do that. He's definitely going to continue with fracking. They made a very strong point on that. So what he will do is sort of a reform effort or trying to at least rebuild the solar industry at a in a more limited way, I can say. So yeah, so I don't know what he's going to do. Like I said, I know more of what he's not going to do. I would hope that he would extend the tax credit, so this is going down to what, 22% and then 10%. I still think the market needs to be more targeted, as you're saying, Anya, to low income communities. But I'd love to hear some other ideas, what you all think is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of it's still up in the air, right? Because a big part of the president-elect's agenda is what he can get through Congress. And so there's a lot that he can do through executive authority. There's regulatory powers that exist at agencies like the EPA, and there are, Cleaner Act regulations on electricity emissions and fuel economy standards. And then on the other hand, you have land use and what they can do at the Department of the Interior. But for big changes, big investments, most of that has to come through Congress. And so you right now have the makeup, the control of the Senate, which is kind of the gatekeeper on policy. It'll be decided by a special election in Georgia at the beginning of January, and not to get overly political on what I don't think is supposed to be a political conversation, but if Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, the two Democratic candidates, don't win, Mitch McConnell's still going to be in control of the Senate, and you're going to have a much harder time getting any climate policy, any clean energy policy through. It's going to have to be, painfully negotiated. And so, I do think there's a pathway for things like clean energy tax credits. I think that those are incredibly important to extend the ITC, the PTC, extend them to batteries, because right now, distributed batteries connected to a solar system can take the tax credit, but a standalone battery on your house can't. So there are, things that can be done to modernize those clean energy tax credits and make them more useful. But it's going to be harder to get those things done, and so, the bigger question is, during the campaign, Biden said he was going to make 40%. He was going to make 40% of the benefit of the investments accrue to disadvantaged communities. And so following through on those commitments, that's going to take some ingenuity of his team on figuring out how to, structure programs and bring more people into those programs and allow them to benefit. It makes it a lot harder when you don't have a Congress who can shape it in the law itself.
I'll just say this about the question about the Biden administration and federal action generally. I trust Anya's and her team's political instincts far more than my own. So if Solar United Neighbors, for folks who are on their list and active with them, or if you're not, I would encourage you to do that. If they have organizing opportunities or ideas about activism that they're asking you to do to push the Biden administration or members of Congress for good, clean energy friendly policy, you should do those things for sure. With that said, I am much more interested in what we all can do at the local level. And that's not to dismiss the importance of the election that just happened or, President-elect Biden's victory or any of those things. But I think about, I think folks, like I think there are some amazing activists on this call, but we all have limited time and energy and families and jobs and all these things. And I think we should be really cutthroat and sort of ruthless about how we use our time and energy to the greatest possible effect. And that is locally, that is where we live. So, I don't know if she's still on the call, but I think this woman in Phoenix, Stacy Champion, was on for the film screening, and Stacy in Arizona practically had single-handedly over the last 5 years taken on, a Fortune 500 company, Arizona Public Service, challenged them on rate increases, on these super unjust mandatory demand charges that would have hurt solar users and also depressed energy efficiency and really hurt low-income people far more than everybody else. Fought them on their pattern of disconnecting customers even on the hottest days in the desert in Arizona, which was totally unregulated. And as a result of all that, and Stacey was one of many, and there are great activist groups and organizations in Arizona who have been part of all of those fights. But Arizona Public Service has a new CEO who is certainly better than the last guy who was like a total anti-clean energy troglodyte. They are moving in a better direction. They have for a utility, they have put forward a pretty good sum of money toward a just transition for the Navajo Nation where a coal plant had been, where they are putting real money and commitments to invest renewable energy into Navajo Nation lands. And all of that has been the product, of lots of things, but local activism was a key component of that. So, that's a long detour to say, well, what the Biden administration can do is important, and I'm sure there will be opportunities for everyone as activists to weigh into that. I think the place where we can have the most effect is at the state level and at the city level, where you can, it's very hard to get 20 minutes with President-elect Biden or the senior members of his cabinet, but you can do that with your city councilor, and you can often do that with the people on your public utility commission, and they're waiting to hear from you. So I would just encourage people to think about where they can have the biggest effect in their backyard.
Yeah, I actually agree with David. When I bring we had a 4-hour board staff meeting today, and our board is sort of national big picture, and they're thinking administration, and our local teams are like, what are you guys talking about? Energy is regulated at the local level. And so what is this noise you all are talking about? We're keeping straight ahead in terms of our local advocacy. But I can say that one of the things I think we can expect from the Biden-Harris administration is being a champion for energy justice, being a champion for environmental justice, and keeping a spotlight on the fact that it's just not about the environment and energy. It's about how we make whole, communities that have been majorly impacted by, dirty air and dirty energy. So we hope to at least elevate the noise in that regard. and the accountability.
Denise, I have a specific question. I think it's for you about mentorship in frontline and BIPOC communities, and what is the importance and the role of sort of training, job training, and mentorship in those communities in terms of getting to a just transition?
Well, let's see. So I think there is a huge, if I'm understanding the question right, there's a huge opportunity for job creation, individual job opportunities, business contracting opportunities, and wealth creation, community wealth creation. There has to be, however, a huge investment in building the capacity of our communities to embrace and to incorporate the new technologies. Let me just give you an example. The small minority contractor community, they are so far removed from the direction of climate policies where cities are going in terms of solar and high performance buildings and building electrification and new building codes and new technologies and new software and new applications. The whole industry is in the policy thrust in the industry is outpacing the capacity of our contractors to keep up with the changes in construction generally, or people to even find the skills and competencies to work in the field, because the investment is not there. There's probably more investment in the workforce and working with disadvantaged communities to train them for STEAM related jobs and grow them into the business, and so very little being done to our small contractors that are really looking to, they're the ones that are going to really either get us out of being in energy ghettos or not, because they're the ones doing the small residential homes, the solar and energy efficiency, or doing the small storefronts and small commercial buildings. My understanding is that Biden is looking to, at least on the retrofit side, retrofit 4 million buildings in 4 years, where 70% of those buildings, those commercial buildings, are less than 10,000 square feet. Well, you're not going to get your ESCOs or your big, Turners to do this. You're going to get your small contractors, and if you don't invest in these small contractors and mentor them into the space, we're going to be again left behind in this new industry. It is critical. I don't see anywhere where there is a recognition of this, an investment in this, where we're addressing, especially small contractors in our communities, legacy issues, the long-term issues of access to capital, bonding and insurance, and by God, now with solar, how are they going to get access to tax credits, and how they put those deals together and bringing investors to those tables. Those are challenges really of the legacy challenge, but then we get these other 21st century challenges of understanding what these new requirements are, even for building materials and solar. So we've got to do a lot more in mentoring. We've got to do a lot more investment and capacity building in communities so that they can actually be a part of this new economy.
Maybe the biggest thing Joe Biden can do for clean energy is nominate Denise Fairchild for Secretary of Energy.
Unfortunately, I was asked and I turned not, and I don't know what it was for, but I already do 12-hour days. I refuse to go to 18-hour days. I'm past that.
There's a question from the audience about how solar advocates and organized labor can work together. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if, Alex, you want to take a stab at that one? I'm sure you've thought about it. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. And I think that, solar installer jobs are good jobs. They're good paying jobs. And I've visited, when I worked for Sunrun, visited branches, met the installers, and saw the hard work they do, and I know the benefits and rewards that they get from doing the work. Labor unions are also, not just a powerful force, but also go to bat for workers' rights and labor standards. And so I think that, some communication and listening is always a good thing, and seeing what both sides are, what's motivating both sides. I think that, you know, you probably find a lot of alignment, a lot more alignment that would surprise you between union electricians who work inside the home and want to install EV chargers and solar panels, and are aligned on the same policies that that climate and solar activists are working on. So I think, you know, I've worked with Republicans, I've worked with utility companies, I've worked with labor when I worked for Harry Reid, and I think that the biggest challenge is getting past the disagreements and sitting down at the table and listening, figuring out where you can move forward. And it just doesn't happen enough. And so, you know, getting over the rhetoric that you do in public, and finding common ground and trying to work together to move things forward, even if they're small things, can really make a difference.
So, I'm going to take a stab at this too, because that's the work that we do. We put unlikely allies together at a table, and we slug it out. And labor is at our table, and many of them left actually over the Keystone pipeline, but that's part of it. And really figure out how labor and business and communities can find common ground. And it is challenging. We're dealing with 100 years worth of misinformation, miscommunication, mistreatment, and how we break through that into a new day it does take time, takes effort. I would say that the labor perspective on this is that, and their pain, where they are looking at the clean energy future, is that it grew. They initially started in 2009 to be in this conversation. We promised them a whole bunch of jobs, and that their members could actually move into a new industry, get out of the dirty industry. But the industry grew up, the solar industry in particular, as a non-unionized sector. And there was no commitment to that. In fact, as I understand it, and I don't know it at that personal level, that it is the solar industry is anti-union, and not just not union, but anti-union. And there is a great deal of animosity there. In my perspective now, there really has to be a give and take on both sides. First of all, you cannot rebuild the middle class with low road jobs. You have to build an opportunity where people can earn a living wage, where they have benefits, they have continuing education, they can grow into a career and support a family. The case for unions. The case for non-unions is that they have to open up. They have to open up and make their apprenticeships and their journey positions accessible to people that have been left out of the union trades. And so there's been movement on the union side to do this. And some cities and some states are obviously better than others. Some trade unions are better than others. I know IBEW is stepping up because they see a lot of opportunity that's occurring. I was an expert witness with the Congress Commerce and Energy Committee, and IBEW was there talking about a clean energy recovery, a clean economy recovery. But that's not all the unions. So I think to Alex's point, that there has to be true engagement, and we've got to build a clean economy that is also building the middle class.
That's great. I have another question that's a little bit big picture thinking. Someone has said, you know, how do you view the role of companies that provide utility scale solar and greening the grid? Because we've been talking about rooftop solar and energy democracy and owning it ourselves and making our own energy. And yet there's this whole other side of it. And the audience is saying, you know, well, how do they fit in? Anybody want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this, and then I'm very curious to hear what Denise and Alex have to say also.
Can't hear you, David.
Oh, how about now? Can you hear me? Okay. So here's my take on this. I am all for utilities swapping out their coal plants and their gas plants for wind farms and solar farms. We need that. And we need more of a market. We need not just utilities to be able to have sort of carte blanche, ability to do that and charge people whatever essentially they can get for it from their regulators, but both even at the utility scale level, at the sort of hundreds of megawatts wind and solar level, let me put it this way: we are on a transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. That is going to happen no matter what. There are a few questions within that. One is how fast it will happen, and one is how many people will be able to share in the benefits of that transition. And I think we will make that transition to clean energy faster and more equitably with more people sharing in the benefits if it's opened up, right? If it's not just the utilities have kind of an ironclad grip on it. So, and by the way, coming at this as a climate activist, which is definitely not the only way into this issue, but that's my background, actually, like, all the science and the models say we need all of it. Like, we do need utility scale wind farms and solar farms, and we need to cover every available roof and parking structure in this country with solar. We need all that, because remember, we don't need to just provide clean energy for our current electric needs. We need to electrify all vehicle transportation. We need to electrify all industry. We need all our buildings that currently provide heat from fossil fuels, from gas. We need to switch those to electricity. That is a lot of electricity we need to generate in this country. So we're not in a position to say, no to clean energy, but utilities certainly are not in a position to say, well, we've got it, so we don't need, people to be putting solar on their rooftops. We need both of those things. It's kind of a yes and from my perspective. And the other thing I'll just point out quickly, because this comes a lot in our work at EPI, is I might be more open to that conversation if utilities were actually doing that, if they were rapidly replacing their coal plants with solar farms and wind farms, if they were not building new gas plants and interstate gas pipelines to transport that frack gas to power plants. They're not doing that for the most part. There are a couple that are moving faster than others, and that's good. We need more of that. We should praise that. But by and large, and you can see some of these resources on our website. We just put out a report on this. Utilities are not decarbonizing quickly enough. They're not decarbonizing remotely quickly enough for what the climate science says we need. They're not decarbonizing quickly enough to meet the Biden-Harris administration's goals of having a net zero carbon electricity sector by 2035. They are, most of the coal plants left. Utilities still do not have retirement dates for them. Many utilities are still at a breakneck pace trying to build gas plants while they still can, and so they're not doing it. But yeah, I think we need both. If there are utilities out there who want to rapidly retire their coal plants and replace them with renewable energy, there's been mountains on mountains of studies that show that will save customers money, not to mention the incredible health benefits of having fewer trips to hospitals and ERs for asthma attacks for parents from that transition. So we need that, but it can't come at the exclusion of, first of all, that transition will happen more cost effectively if others are allowed to bid into it, if it's not just the utilities doing it. And it certainly can't happen at the exclusion of energy democracy, as Denise said before. So yeah, that's my take on it.
And I would just add to that it really also, especially if you saw in the film how it's been a lifesaver for rural communities, right? That and they're sort of new. Well, and let me just say that I was sort of, I've grown a little bit over time because I was anti-utility scale solar, but I have grown into it, recognizing that you look at tech companies, they're buying, they need energy at the 2 gigawatt level per year, right? And so if they're making true on their commitment to be net zero by whatever date, they're going to have to buy energy at that level, and it's not going to come in 2, 4, 5 megawatt projects. So, but the question is, and so rural communities are sort of finding an economic benefit out of utility scale solar. There's a way where they're also doing it in a way that supports biodiversity and still land conservation and protection and farming actually. But I can say that utilities are doing it without the justice-oriented focus, that we need to figure out how we embed equity, participation opportunities for communities in this, where there is ownership, where there is, and democratization, where there are jobs, where there are business opportunities. And I don't think the utilities that are doing utility scale solar are anywhere close to understanding how we understand and see the world going forward.
Yeah, we're only at 3% solar right now in the US, and I think it's less than 7% wind. So we have less than 10% solar and wind, and then there's some hydro, and then we have some, you know, whatever you think about nuclear power, it's zero low carbon, and a lot of that is expiring. So we have a major problem, and so I think we need to develop smart, but we need to develop fast. And I think that's why, you know, distributed and utility scale solar just really complement each other really well. And I wish that it was talked about, you know, in that way more, because we need to rapidly replace this, the big gas and coal-fired generation, and get there, because we don't have a ton of time to reach the kind of carbon reductions that are necessary to keep on track with you know, 2 degree or hopefully 1.5 degree temperature rise.
Can I just throw something crazy in the mix? Because we spend a lot of time on figuring out how we green our production processes so that we produce, but we produce greener. I think we underdevelop the idea that we really do need to consume less. We and how we use energy is for use value. I think the data is showing that the use of energy for our basic needs, for food, growing our food, for shelter, is declining, and discretionary energy consumption continues to rise for stuff that we really don't need, right? And when do we actually begin to think about energy in the context of a larger ecosystem where we are really way beyond our holding capacity for all the stuff that we're extracting and consuming? And I don't think there's enough investment of time, energy, technologies, money, values been embedded in using energy for essential issues as opposed to the McMansions and the yachts and the fifth car and the other things that we are using that really is just beyond the capacity of Earth to sustain.
Wow, I think we could keep going, but we're nearly at the end. And there's a question that I don't know if anybody wants to pick up because it's a hard question. But the question was, what were the panelists' responses to the dying coal miner who wanted to reopen the mines? And I'm just wondering if any of you want to share a reflection on that.
That to me was the most painful part of the whole film, the one that impacted me the most, because at the end you could see, to that question about, should mining continue, and then it got to a question about his children, and he wanted to continue because it was his life. It was what he, grew up at. Even though he was dying, it was not to invalidate him as a person and what he had to do in his life, whether he chose to or not. And he thought about it really hard, about that it was bread and butter on his table. It's bread and butter on his neighbors' tables. It was what put his kids in school, and you have to reward him for that. But then he thought hard about, no, he didn't want his children to have black lung, right? And so how do we create a different world? A new sense of possibilities for all those that just transition issue for all those that are in the fossil fuel industry, and how we not invalidate their lives, and give them an alternative that they can be proud of with their families.
I think it's really important what Denise said, and being able to empathize and understand the impact that this transition has on those communities, because if you can't, then you can't, especially for, decision makers or politicians or, people even in the industry, you can't sit down at the same table and try to move forward and work something out, because if you don't understand what they're going through and what they need to have a healthy, comfortable existence, then you can't be a fair negotiator. You can't be a fair practitioner at something. So I really do think that it was a powerful moment, and I'm glad that Jonathan Scott and team put it in the documentary, because it kind of pivoted away from just the fight with utilities and yes solar, no solar, but got into the heart of what's at this transition for many communities.
I'm going to cut in and squeeze one last question in the last 90 seconds. We have educators and people who are wanting to know, how do I learn more? And so if you could just say, if there was one book, one blog, one article, one author that you would say to learn more about these issues, and then we'll thank everybody for joining us.
I would say read Naomi Klein's book, This Says It All. Is that the name of it? Really puts this energy question in global context and an economic perspective on it. It's very readable.
I'd suggest.
And I should say energy democracy, right, Anya? Read our book on energy democracy. Not even promoting ourselves. Oh, gosh.
I think you need to put a link in the chat so everyone can buy a copy.
I don't even know how to do that.
I would read The Reckoning by David Halberstam. It was the last book I read, but it is about the decline of the U.S. auto industry and basically what happened when Japanese and other foreign automakers ate their lunch. And it really gets inside the boardroom and the culture of the companies and makes you see what happened to Detroit and what led to the decline.
What's the name of the book?
The Reckoning.
The Reckoning.
Read Energy Democracy for sure. You can subscribe for articles from our website, energyandpolicy.org, if you want to learn more about utilities and their political machines. If you're a wonky person and you want to wonk out, Dave Roberts has a new newsletter and he writes really smart wonky stuff about these issues. And if you just want to read generally about how political power works and is deployed, particularly at like the municipal level, The Power Broker by Robert Caro was a book that really informed a lot of my thinking, particularly about how monopolies use money to deploy power. It's very long, but it's very good.
Well, I just want to thank you. It's just delightful to have some time with you. This is the longest time I've had with any of the three of you in a long time. So thank you for joining us. Have a beautiful evening, and thank all the panelists for joining us tonight. And take care, and we'll keep fighting.